Good morning. We are continuing with Chapter 9, the S Dakota War of 1862. Let's look at those key terms. We've already come across a few of them in our chapter. Let's review what they are. What is agency? You can tell me what the agency means. Ryan?
A U.S. government field office?
Yeah, the U.S. government field office. We've talked in other chapters about it being the Indian Affairs officer. They work in the field office, doing the relations between the government and the American Indians. And we've learned about Galbraith, who was the agent that was working during the time of the U.S. Dakota War. So we've read a little bit about him already. Traditional Dakota. Who is a traditional Dakota, Peyton?
Is someone that does not want to assimilate and wants to keep their traditions?
Yeah, it's the Dakota that didn't want to assimilate. They wanted to keep their traditions. They wanted to live how they've lived for thousands of years. They wanted to keep their heritage. So they opposed, resisted assimilating to the European American ways. So who are the farm Dakota? Chase?
They were the Dakota that assimilated into farming, the European Americans.
Yeah, they were the Dakota that assimilated to some of the European American ways. They adopted some of those European ways, including farming, the way that the settlers were farming, which is a different way of farming than how they had farmed before. Remember, we read about how some reasons why they might have adopted those ways is because they saw some of the changes were a good change. They're not living the same lifestyle that they had lived thousands of years ago because now they're on the reservations. So they need to make some changes and adopt some new ways to live on the reservation. Some of them wanted to do some of those small changes so the white settlers wouldn't be scared of them, cutting their hair, changing their appearance, so that way they weren't so different, because we know that some people are scared of those differences. So they were hoping that if they changed the way they looked a little bit, then maybe they would just be left alone. Internment camp. What can you tell me about internment camps? Sam?
Like a prisoner of war camp where I don't know how to explain it other than
Okay, so it's a camp setup, so it's not just like the jailhouse where there's only 2 cells. It's a camp where they can send their prisoners of war, the political prisoners, and even civilians can be sent there. So it's for a larger group of people. We talked about how we've seen internment camps in American history before. During World War II, the Japanese were sent to internment camps. So we haven't found out yet how internment camps were used during the U.S. Dakota War. So maybe we'll learn about that today as we're learning about the actual war. Exile. Molly?
To force to leave one's country or homeland.
Yeah, forcing somebody out of their country or homeland. All right, so we've read about different perspectives of the different groups involved: the traditional Dakota, the farm Dakota, the government workers, the missionaries. So we've read some of their perspectives on what was going on and how the tensions were building between the different groups. Today we're going to read about the actual war. So let's open up to page 178. In the picture there, we see Little Crow. He felt conflicted over whether his people should go to war. As you can see from his clothing, he had adopted some European ways. So he's wearing that European clothing. So would he be a traditional Dakota or a farm Dakota? Farm Dakota, because he has adopted some of that ways. He's assimilated a little bit, and so he doesn't want to go to war. Nobody wants to go to war. Okay, we know how devastating war can be, but sometimes that's your only resort because you're trying to protect yourself, save yourself. On August 17th, 1862, the tensions turned to bloodshed. Though the details are still debated, the basic facts are these. 4 young Dakota men killed 5 European American settlers near the town of Acton in an argument over eggs. Remember, the Dakota were starving. They weren't able to buy food because the traders weren't selling to them because they didn't have the money. The traders didn't want to go broke themselves, so they were protecting themselves. So the Dakota now are starving. They need food. So there's this fight over the eggs, and some European Americans get killed. That night, traditional Dakota discussed the situation among themselves. Some believed that the young men who killed the settlers should be handed over to the U.S. government for punishment. Many others believed that surrendering the young men would do no good, that the government would use the killings as an excuse to punish all the Dakota. They said, so think about that. If 4 of us get into a fight out at recess, and then everybody in the grade has to lose recess because 4 people out of the 56 sixth graders got into a fight. So sometimes the actions of a few affect everyone. Sometimes it's not fair. They're saying, yeah, we had 4 people that killed, that's bad. They killed some settlers over the eggs, that's bad. But if we turn them over, they're just gonna punish all of us anyways. So why turn them over? Because no matter what, they're gonna punish all of the Dakota. They said that the Dakota should strike out at their enemies before their enemies struck out at them. The time was right, they said. They believed the U.S. military would not fight back because its attention was focused on the Civil War. So they're saying, you know what? We know they're going to punish all of us. We know this is kind of the history that we've had with the U.S. government. They're going to use any excuse to make life even worse for us. So let's use this time while the military is focused on the Civil War, because we know that the U.S. military is bigger than what the Dakota have to fight, but they've got a lot of people in the Civil War. So let's use this time to fight back because we actually have a chance right now. Finally, the traditional Dakota turned to one of their leaders, Little Crow, or Toyota Duta. At first, Little Crow spoke for peace, even as many of the young men argued for war. If you strike at the white people, he said, they will turn on you and devour you and your women and little children, just as the locusts in their time fall on the trees and devour all the leaves in one day. So he's saying, yeah, it sounds like it might be a good idea, but if we fight them, they will just attack all Dakota, even the women and children who have done nothing. It's not going to end well. It's going to be a massacre. But despite his concerns, Little Crow agreed to lead his people into war. Too many people wanted to go into war. They wanted to try to defend themselves. So he finally caved and said, okay, Teodos is not a coward, he told them. He will die with you. He was saying, it's not going to end well, but if this is what you're doing, I will do it with you. We are one people. I will support you and be loyal. What was that? What do you mean one person? All of the Dakota see themselves as you can use that term. It doesn't sound like it's proper grammar, but you say we are one people. We are one group. So when you say we're one people, you're saying we're one. We're united. Okay. Yes.
Did Dakota always talk in third person?
I don't know. Some people do, some people don't. I'm guessing that was just how he was talking at that time. On the following morning, August 18th, Dakota soldiers attacked the Lower Sioux Agency. So remember, this is like a town. Okay, so it's not just the government building. There's a whole town set up. They struck first at the traders' houses. They killed several traders, including Andrew Merrick, who was later found with grass stuffed in his mouth. Remember the quote that he made? Oh, we're not going to sell them food. For all I care, they can just go out and eat grass. So they killed him because they were angry he wouldn't sell them any food. And then because they were angry about how he was treating them, they stuffed the grass in his mouth. Then they moved east to the agency headquarters. At the ferry crossing on the Minnesota River, they ambushed a group of U.S. soldiers. Soon they were spreading out beyond the reservation, overrunning small farms and killing settlers before they could escape. More than 300 people, including women, many women and children, were killed in attacks by these Dakota in the first 2 days. So they were afraid that they would be massacred, that the government would see these 4 men killing the settlers and use it to attack the Dakota. So now they're just all out attacking the white, anybody who's white. So it wasn't just the traders who treated them poorly. They even attacked the settlers who had nothing to do with how they were treated, who were innocent. Their only crime was being a white settler. Not the way that I choose to handle my affairs, but you have to look at their perspective, right? They were lashing out because they wanted to try to take back some of their life, some of their freedom. So unfortunately, the way they were lashing out wasn't against just the people responsible. They also lashed out against innocent people. All across the reservation, Farm Dakota were beginning to fear for their lives. Remember, there's a tension between traditional Dakota and Farm Dakota because they both were viewing life differently and how they should react to the white settlers, to the European Americans. So the Farm Dakota are like, oh my goodness, the traditional Dakota have gone to war. And are they going to attack us now? Even though we're both Dakota, are they going to attack us because we're living our lives differently? Wounded Man, who lived near the Lower Sioux Agency, began preparing for trouble as soon as he heard the gunshots. I went up to the top of my house, and from there I could hear the shouts of the Indians and see them plundering the stores, he recalled. The men of my band now began to assemble at my house. We counseled, but could do nothing to resist the hostile Indians because we were so few and they were between us and the settlements. Later, some of the Farm Dakota helped arrange the release of many European American prisoners who were being held by the traditional Dakota. Settlers react. How do you think they're going to react? Maybe in the same way. Maybe they're going to fight back because they're killing the settlers. Let's see. Or maybe they might run away, try to escape because they're not soldiers. Yeah. Meanwhile, on the prairie beyond the reservation, hundreds of settlers were fleeing their homes and warning each other of the danger. These refugees, or people seeking safety, included a young German immigrant named Mary Schwant. Schwant was working in the home of another family when news of the Dakota attacks arrived. She fled in a wagon with 2 other girls, Maddie Williams and Mary Anderson, and 2 men, one named Mr. Patois and one named Mr. Davis. About 8 miles from the town of New Ulm, they encountered a large group of Dakota. 2 of them dashed forward to us, one on each side of the wagon, and ordered us to halt, Mary recalled. Mr. Patois turned the wagon to one side of the road, and all of us jumped out except him. As we leaped out, Mr. Davis cried, "We are lost!" Mary watched as the Dakota killed Patois and Davis. She and the other 2 girls were captured and taken to Little Crow's village on the reservation. In the days that followed, the Dakota launched a series of attacks on New Ulm and on nearby Fort Ridgely. The people of New Ulm beat back the Dakota each time the Dakota attacked. The Dakota were not able to take over Fort Ridgely either. American soldiers there were assisted by local settlers who had fled to the fort for protection. So the settlers fled their house because they were alone and they wouldn't be able to withstand an attack, and they fled to the fort or to the town of New Ulm, and they kind of banded together and they helped to protect themselves then. Mary Schwant. Mary Schwant was 14 years old when the war began. Her parents, her sister, and 2 of her brothers were killed in the fighting, and she was captured. Her recollections of the war were published in 1894. While in Little Crow's village, I saw some of my father's cattle and many of our household goods in the hands of the Indians. I now knew that my family had been plundered, and I believed murdered. I was very, very wretched and cared not how soon I too was killed. So here she is taken captive. She had been working, so she wasn't at home. She had been working outside of the house. She's taken captive. She doesn't know what happened to her family. She's brought to the village, and she sees her mom's cups, her mom's plates, her dad's clothes, and she knows, well, if the Indians have all of our stuff, that means nobody's alive at home, that they overtook our farm and took our belongings and killed everyone. So she knew that her family was dead. She's only 14 at this time. So imagine how devastating that is. She watched the men that she was with be killed. She's taken captive. Now she's realizing her whole family's dead. Destruction of war. 9 days after the fighting began, Colonel Henry Sibley, the former Minnesota governor, led more than 1,400 soldiers into the prairie to battle the Dakota. Soon it became clear to many Dakota that they could not win. There were too many soldiers. The settlers were fighting back and joining in. By the end of September, the U.S. Dakota War was over. The Dakota had been defeated in a final battle at Wood Lake on September 23rd. Over 2,000 surrendered to Sibley's forces. So remember, somebody was saying that Henry Sibley, who we knew was a prominent figure in the territory and getting the territory turned into a state, he was leading, he was the governor, the former governor. He was the governor when it was a territory. So now he's leading the army. Many hundreds more fled from Minnesota to avoid capture, including Little Crow and some of his followers. The war had taken a tremendous toll on the region's people and landscape. Just over 70 U.S. soldiers and between 75 to 100 Dakota soldiers had been killed. More than 500 settlers had been killed, most in raids by the Dakota in the first week of war. Hundreds of farms were left empty as 20,000 settlers fled for safety. Towns like New Ulm were devastated. There, dozens of buildings were burned, and hundreds of residents were left wounded or homeless. This destruction would affect southern Minnesota for years as people struggled to rebuild their lives. While settlers rebuilt, the Dakota, including those who had not fought in the war, were to suffer terrible consequences. So think about what we learned about the South during the Civil War, how the land was ravaged. It was destroyed by the fighting, by the cannonballs, making the big craters. The farms were destroyed. And we said, oh, but that didn't happen in Minnesota. Minnesota actually prospered during the Civil War because our land wasn't destroyed. But not in southern Minnesota. Southern Minnesota wasn't affected by the Civil War, but it was severely affected by this war, the U.S. Dakota War, because the land is destroyed. The farms are destroyed. The towns are destroyed. So the Dakota had tried to fight back because they were starving. Their way of life is being seriously affected by not getting their annuities, the traders not selling to them. They were trying to fight back because they were so miserable, because the U.S. government kept taking away their land, not providing what they said they would. So they fought back. The U.S. military was too strong for them, and they were defeated. So think about how they fought. They were massacring settlers. They were killing innocent people. So now the U.S. government is saying, you were horrible. You were hurting and killing these innocent people. Now it's going to flip. And it says, even the Dakota who had not fought in the war were to suffer terrible consequences. So now it's the flip side of it. The settlers were innocent and being slaughtered. Now the Dakota, even the innocent ones, are going to be severely punished. Because nobody wants to have people slaughtered and massacred. So now they're going to punish on the other side. Is it right to punish people who are innocent? No. It wasn't right for the Dakota to massacre the settlers. It's not right for the U.S. to now treat all Dakota horribly. It's just kind of a vicious cycle. So tomorrow we're going to start the aftermath. where we're going to learn what those terrible consequences are, how people are able to come back from this war that it takes years to come back from. We have families that are destroyed. People like Mary, whose whole families were murdered. She's got to try to make her life again. So we're going to find out how they do this. Thank you to my friends who are not moving around. Let's be listening. So it was a short war. So it's a short chapter. There's a short part about it, but we have to look at all those different perspectives. We have to think about how the missionaries saw it, how the government saw it, how the traders saw it, how the traditional Dakota, the farm Dakota are viewing it. They all have a different perspective, and they all have different reasons why they behave the way they behave. You might have legitimate reasons to do something, but it doesn't make it right. We know why the Dakota were upset. Still not okay to massacre innocent settlers. We know why the U.S. is going to be upset because their settlers were massacred. Not okay to have terrible consequences against all Dakota. All Dakota weren't bad. So we're going to see why people behave the way they behave. So if you are one of my friends at home watching this, we hope that you are well and that we see you soon, and have a good day.